Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Fourth Kind. Today, I'm going to be discussing my own experience and talking about my first abduction. Enjoy the show. It was around 1989, and I had just dealt with some emotional trauma. My mom and dad had just divorced. We had to go live with my grandma and her sisters in Boston. I missed my dad. And I'd come from a farm up in Maine where all I knew was animals and trees and mountains, and it was in the middle of nowhere. We ended up having to move to Boston, where it was a different experience. The stars were not so clear either, so I loved looking at the stars with my dad at night. Before then, he used to push me on a swing, and I would look up at the stars, and he would tell me stories about bears and deer, and it was fun. So I settled into my new home in Boston. We were living with my grandmother and her two sisters, my aunt, her sister. I asked if she could take me to go get ice cream after dinner one evening. So it was getting dark at this point. The sun was already kind of set, and the stars were starting to come out. Whatever stars you could see in the city. There was a few at that time. I was sitting in the car with her, and we were about to drive over a bridge. There wasn't anyone else around. It was kind of a dead time at night during the weekday. It was a perfect night for ice cream. So I'm sticking my head out the window and looking at the stars. I was missing them, actually, and I was thinking of my dad because I was missing him. All of a sudden, I noticed the few stars that were up there started to disappear. And I thought maybe a cloud or something moved in front of it. And I realized this giant black object was covering them, and it looked like it started really small as it came down straight from the blackness of the universe, and it came straight down and it started to cover all the stars and soon even the clouds, and it just kind of sank lower and lower until it was getting bigger and bigger, and no lights were on it. It was completely silent, and as it got very low, it was now hovering about 2 feet above my Aunt Helen's car. I could almost touch it. And I was trying to almost touch this thing. I didn't know what it was. I figured this was another type of plane. I can feel my aunt pulling on my shirt, but at the same time, trying to get words out to tell me to get in. She's yelling at me, get in the car. And so I'm like, okay, and I come back in and I look at her, and she's absolutely petrified. She's got her hands on the wheel and she's ready to start moving, but the car stopped moving at this point, and I noticed that. I also noticed she was completely, going into shock or too scared to communicate at this point. And my aunt is now trying to just grab my shirt, not even looking. It's almost like she was afraid to look at it. I once again disobeyed my aunt, and I go back out to look at it. I'm trying to touch it. I just wanted to touch it. I wasn't afraid, and it was about the size of a football field. The metal was a gunmetal black color, no lights, and completely silent. I once again came back in. I noticed she wasn't pulling on my shirt anymore. She wasn't kind of gesturing for me to come back in. When I looked at her, now she's not moving at all. She's completely frozen stiff. In fact, everything felt like it was frozen stiff. The car wasn't moving. Nothing was moving. Her hands were just firmly gripped on the wheel. This was, to me, the scariest part, I think, of the experience, was seeing my aunt kind of not moving. So I waved my hand in front of her face and nudging her a little, and she was just like not move. And she had this look of horror on her face, soulless, almost like someone paused her, like it was a movie or a video game. So I thought, well, she's not pulling on my shirt anymore. I can maybe sneak back out the window and see if that thing was still there. And it was. And I remember the last moment is just me reaching for it and trying to touch it. I don't have a memory of being abducted, beamed up by a beam of light, or any beings coming and getting me or anything like that. I just remember the next thing was I was in a hall with other children, and it was this giant room. The ceiling must have been about 40 feet high, and we're surrounded by these metallic walls. It felt like a light blue light was sort of emanating from somewhere, and it was very, very just kind of odd, I was just in the car with my aunt, and now I'm with all these other kids, hundreds hundreds of kids. We're kind of just waiting in this hallway, what felt like a hallway. And there were a few other tall beings in robes. My grandmother had just enrolled me into Catholic school, so I was learning about Catholicism and all that. And I just see these really tall, hooded, robed beings, figures walking around us and kind of acting like teachers almost, guides. They were speaking to us and telling us to be patient and wait. And we didn't know exactly where we were going, but I remember talking to a few of the other kids, and all of a sudden, these big doors that were from the ceiling to the floor opened. And as they opened, we were now being told to go into that room. And it felt a little better now because it wasn't so what felt kind of claustrophobic. And we ended up walking and following each other and going in, and I was in awe. This room was not in the shape of a triangle. I think this was a different place they took us to. The room was completely circular now at this point. We were in this massive space, what felt kind of like a giant mall-like space. It was so big. There was multiple layers to it. And I only know this because the curious child in me ran into the room. This tall being was there, and he was gesturing for me to come to him. I just completely ignored him and ran past him. I looked over this little railing that was there, and I could see there was multiple layers and a light sort of coming from the ceiling, and it was kind of a soft light, a little brighter now than the hall that we were in earlier, but everything was relaxing, calming light to it, a very warm feeling, I guess. There was other layers with more children and tall adult beings walking around with these children and guiding them around just like they were on our floor. It was more of a giant donut-shaped sort of thing. This place was just very big. At least to me, as a child, I kind of think this place was amazing. And the walls had all along it these massive, what looked like screens to me, giant screens that went from the ceiling to the floor. And on the screens were basically these images or video footage almost. The screens, to me, these were screens as a child. I thought of giant movie screens, not in the horizontal shape that we're used to, but more of a vertical shape. And they were curved slightly as they fit the wall. The walls were a little curved, so these screens were also curved. And I thought they were screens at the time because this technology didn't really exist in 1989, and all I could think of was it's set up kind of like a movie theater. The lights are a little dim where we're walking around. It's a little dim, but I think enough so that you could see the screens and all that, and they were very bright and vibrant in color and very detailed, and I remember that kind of like more like what we have today in this time. And but the only difference is that I noticed the screens were like a transparent, like a glass, and behind the video footage were stars. So I don't know if we were in space or if this was just some kind of projected image that they were projecting across all the walls or something. I really don't know. It was really fascinating to me, and I didn't quite understand what we were doing here, what this place was. And these beings were they gave off this sort of loving energy. It didn't come off to me as bad or scary or anything like that, so I just kind of trusted them. To me, they were just tall adult figures. I obeyed what they said. They felt like you could trust them, and they were guiding children around all of this space and showing us these screens. And it started from one end, and it kind of worked its way all the way around. I get myself an assigned guide, and once again that tall being comes up to me, and he doesn't give me a name. By the way, there is no name. He just knows who I am, and instantly he starts to communicate with me. I noticed when I was more curious about who this being was, so I'm looking at him, I'm trying to see his features. They were not human, but I was not afraid. I just kind of thought he was Jesus or an angel or something. I don't really think of him as being scary, but he had this sort of energy that was very loving, like a Jesus kind of energy. So I just want to make that quite clear, because I was just learning about Jesus and learning about religion, and to me it was new. I thought this is what it is, some kind of godly thing. And they were dressed like priests, sort of, they had the robes, but the hood was covering his whole face, and Now, keep in mind, these beings are very tall. He was about 7 feet, and I was very, very little, and I knew he was taller than most people, so I just thought that was fascinating. He had a very gentle way of speaking, at least in my thoughts. I didn't see his mouth moving, and he did have a voice, but it's almost like an internal sort of voice, like when you're reading. It's very strange. I can't really explain it, but I too did not speak verbally. Like, I was just asking questions in my own thoughts and he was answering them. So I thought, oh wow, that's interesting. He's not moving his mouth, but he knows what I'm thinking. And to me, that just felt very natural. I can't really explain that, but it felt very natural. And I could think of something very quickly and he would answer immediately. He was very patient with me. Being a child, I'm asking him all these questions about his eyes. In fact, he just completely said, I want you to see something. Come, follow me. So he takes my hand. There was a sleeve, a wide sleeve that he had, and I noticed little designs were on it. And his hand came through, and it just was this big, long, pale hand. I remember him taking my little hand, and it was this little child hand inside of his really big hand. So I just thought that was interesting. And the hoods, I think, were there to kind of sort of hide his eyes, hide their features from maybe frightening us children. I was now in this place with, I believe, hundreds, if not thousands of children. There was a lot of kids here being guided around by these tall beings. Like, I was not alone in this space. So as he guided me closer to these screens, we started on the first one on the right. I was looking at it and I was like, well, what is this? And he's showing me brand new ancient civilizations. And when I say that, it was like Egypt and Greece and places like I didn't even know that were not in ruin. They looked incredible, and I didn't believe that they were even of Earth. But he tried to tell me these were things that we made. And to me, I just, as a 6-year-old, I didn't know. Like, I'm looking at that, like, how did we make that? Like, this exists? They're beautiful. Like, all I could think about was how incredibly beautiful this was. And I didn't know what these places were, half of them. And he said, we're very, and this was one of the things he definitely pointed out, was we are very proud of what humans have done here. Things that they have built, things that we basically create. They seem to be extremely proud about this. And he kept repeating as the images continued to flow in front of me on this screen. And this was a story that they were trying to tell along all these screens that went all the way along the walls. And they were taking us step by step through each screen. And it was a story not about aliens or them or anything. It was about us. I thought that was fascinating, that they were talking about us, and I was more curious about them. Like, I didn't know who he was. Was he a religious figure of some kind? Was he from, the Bible? Like, what is this? Is he an angel? And that was not what this was about at all. It was definitely something else. He wanted us to learn what was on them, and that was all he stuck to, so he wouldn't answer my other questions. I was like, okay, and he told me to pay attention and that this was very important. So I'm learning, and he's teaching me about humans and all the things. He's showing us different decades now. They were walking around showing all of us the different decades, different eras of human evolution, basically, as we got more advanced and up until the point of 1989. And then he showed me the stuff that they weren't very proud about. And this is where he said, here we have these bombs and these weapons and these things that we are not proud about. And he said that we are very disappointed in what we have done. And now, to me, I wasn't aware of what a bomb, like what this type of bomb was. I knew at that age we were told to hide under our desks. This was around the end of the Cold War. It was still a Cold War, but it was coming to an end eventually. We were still told to hide under our desk, to hide from this bomb, this scary thing that was supposed to happen to us. And as a kid, I didn't really know what that meant. To me, that was still very new, and it was just like I was just being taught about this, and I didn't know the amount of devastation this type of bomb could trigger. I didn't know how bad it was. I thought, okay, we would survive if we hid under the desk, so it can't be that bad. And no, that wasn't the case at all. And he was like, no, this will destroy everything. He showed me, he waved his hand or something, and all of a sudden this other video played on one of the screens, and he's like, let me show you something. And he shows me little animals starting to die from this bomb and what it would do to all the animals and vegetation on Earth. He was showing trees and little cute animals dying, and it was sad. It was like wolves and bunnies and fluffy creatures that this is what would happen, and this is what would happen. And it would show how it would just completely wipe out all of these little animals and plants and creatures for miles and miles, and in fact the entire planet. And then eventually he showed what the planet would look like, and I was like, I don't want that. And I didn't want to see the little animals dying anymore. So I do remember other kids starting to cry at this point when they were around this area, and as they were showing us the animals dying, and I was starting to cry too. I remember not feeling good about this, like very much being upset and sad, and I didn't want to believe that this was a thing. And he said, we are very disappointed in humans creating this, and this is a weapon that cannot ever be used, and it will never be used. So I didn't know if this was something in the future that we would experience, or if this is something that happened in our past. And I didn't know that. I wasn't aware. But he had footage of this mushroom cloud, and that's what I remember is the mushroom cloud was the worst thing, the most disappointment of human creation, things we created. That's what this was about. I honestly don't think our governments are telling us just how bad these weapons are. I know that they're bad, and that, we all think we might be able to survive it even in a bunker, but no, I think it's much worse than that at this point. And I think that's what he was trying to tell us, that none of these, not even one, can be released. It would destroy everything we know. Your bunker is not going to protect you. It is basically like the end of all things if one of them goes off. I just don't see humans being able to let go of this, in my opinion. In what I believe this particular thing is, I think that we are going to see humans ever giving this weapon up so easily, or agreeing to. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to take an outside force to remove these weapons from us, and that might be something that our government knows about. I feel like they were preparing my generation. I don't know if this happened to other generations before me, but it felt like everyone in that room was my age. Like something they were trying to warn us about, not just that these weapons are devastating and disappointing, but also that we might see it in our lifetime. That's the feeling that I kind of got from him. They don't want that. They're not going to let it happen. I'm thinking maybe they're going to try to take it from us, like they're going to come here and that's it. And I don't think they're coming from anywhere. I think they've been here. They had video footage of ancient civilizations that were still intact and not ancient, It looked like modern day, but beautiful stone cities with vegetation around it. Everything was just beautiful. It was human history and human design that they were very proud about. Obviously, they seem to support our creations very heavily, almost like parents, very proud of us. I actually painted a couple. So let's get into the looks. I'm going to put a picture up. My artwork I don't even think is capturing this as well, but you can see that I have him in shadow, but I think he was even more in shadow from how I can remember it. And the eyes were very blue. And I only knew this because they kind of almost glowed. It's not like the normal eye color that a human would have for blue eyes. They're very, very big, and they almost have a sort of slight luminescent glow to them. Not too bright. It wasn't like glowing so much that it was lighting up everything, but just enough so that you could see the color. But I can see why they would cover their eyes. It would have been very scary, I think, if we were looking at them without the hoods. I think as children especially, I think the hoods kind of humanize them a little bit. I think without the hood, they would definitely appear for non-human very quickly, and it would be too much. I think they know that they're scary to us. They're very aware of that. And I mean, it makes sense. We would be very scared, and especially children. Seeing like giant eyeballs is not something you want to look at. Like, it's very unsettling. I know there were thousands of more kids with me on this craft or place wherever we were. I just want to see if anyone else has seen this. To me, this is just a very important message and an experience that was very different than other experiences that I will be sharing with you in the future. And I'm hoping that maybe this will help some of you come forward and talk about it. I'm really searching for some of the other kids that might have been on that ship with me. Please come forward if you did, even privately if you want. I would love to hear your experience with this, and has seen them exactly the same with the big, and I mean the eyes go from like all around the top here, and then all from my cheekbone all the way around like that. Like, these are not something you just can handle very easily. They're very, very big. It's a little unsettling. I did notice though, a little blonde hair was coming out from the shoulder area. So you would see his robe, the hood, and then just a little of the hair was like peeking out like that. So I saw he had hair, and a little of it kind of around his face, kind of like how I have it, you know, but a lot less. It was very thin hair, not very thick or curly or anything like that. Very, very thin hair, and just a little bit, not even as long as mine. It came up a little bit more to about this length, and I could see it sticking out. That's one other thing that made him feel a little bit more human in that sense, or even angelic. And so the next thing I remember is I'm back in the car, and my aunt is starting to finally come out of it. She's almost like waking up from the experience she was in, still with that sort of almost confused, fearful gaze in her eyes, but at the same time now she's feeling like she wants to start moving again and just doesn't even question anything, doesn't talk to me. I'm just looking at her. It's almost like all of time began to activate again. Stuff started to move. A couple cars started to come down the street. It was very odd. My Aunt Helen noticed the car was off, and she turns the key. Car starts up, and we begin to move again. We didn't go for ice cream, and I was very sad about that. But hours were gone, just completely missing. It was now very late. When we got home, my other aunt, her sister, basically was like, "Where have you two been? It's been hours." And that was it. That was basically how it was. My aunt stayed completely silent. She didn't even want to talk at all. In fact, I think she was still in some kind of shock. And when she was being asked questions by her sister, she basically just didn't even answer. She just said, "No, nothing happened." And then she went to her room, and that was it. And then my grandmother came and picked me up that evening to take me back to her house. Thank you so much for joining me on my episode. I have much more to share with you, and if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button down below, and please subscribe. I'm going to have some podcasts, some live videos where you can ask questions and we can talk about those. And I also have some interviews coming up. I also did an interview with a man named Kevin, and I will put a link to his video down below coming up Sunday. So I really can't wait to share that with you. It's basically the same thing I talked about here in this video. He's got some really cool videos on paranormal stuff. So if you're into ghosts and really more into that stuff, definitely go check him out. He's got some really great stuff on there. And don't forget, down below in the description is my email address where you can write to the show and tell me your experience and what you would like to do with it. And if it's just a private thing you want to keep to share with me, then so be it. I won't share it on the show at all. But if you are willing to go forward and talk about it, let me know and we can set something up. Yes, so let's continue on with learning about these mysterious beings together. And don't forget to keep looking up.